When it comes to real-world projects and the challenges they face, it takes problem-solving, communication, collaborative leadership, and strategic thinking to deliver results. And project professionals with these power skills make a big impact on success. Power skills, also called soft skills or interpersonal skills, provide a clear advantage when tackling those challenges, both in individual projects and across organizations. PMI's Pulse of the Profession 2023 report, Power Skills, Redefining Project Success, explores why organizations that prioritize these critical skills see more successful projects and enhanced value delivery. To understand what drives project value, PMI analyzed data from nearly 3,500 project professionals. Survey results show that communication, problem-solving, collaborative leadership, and strategic thinking are the four most critical power skills in helping to fulfill organizational objectives. Explore the report and learn how organizations that put emphasis on power skills stand out for their commitment to factors that drive project success, including benefits realization maturity, organizational agility, and project management maturity. Download the Pulse of the Profession report now on PMI.org.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we discuss gender collaboration and the future of work. My name is Megan Speight, and I am Project Management Institute's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager. I have the pleasure of being in conversation with the formidable Susan Coleman, author, lawyer, podcaster, impactful human, change maker, all these incredible things. Her bio is available for everyone to read, and I truly encourage you to take the time to do so because it truly is quite the impressive one. I was able to take a look at that bio, and Susan, before we truly jump in, I'd actually like you to tell me more about what it was like establishing the UN's first program on negotiation, mediation, and conflict resolution. You know, I recently watched the movie The Woman King with Viola Davis, and there are quite a few moments during that movie where Viola Davis's character has to use some negotiation, mediation, and quite frankly, pure conflict resolution skills. And not only does she have to do so amongst women of her own team, but also with other leaders within the community that she's in, with other individuals outside of her direct community, but with similar cultures. And of course, with other individuals who are completely from other countries and other cultures altogether. I was really inspired by that movie, so it was kind of perfectly timed to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Well, Megan, hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks to PMI for having me, and hello to everybody around the world. It's really fun to do these talks and not know where everybody is, but just imagine all of you in different spots on the globe. It's really a pleasure to be here. That question is a big question, and I'll try and answer it simply. It's kind of an answer about following your gut. You know, I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard after I'd been practicing as a litigator for a while, and got really inspired by the program on negotiation, as I still am, at the Harvard Law School, and did a lot of work with them. But felt like there needed to be intercultural negotiation, which they have subsequently incorporated, but there wasn't any at the time. And I felt like there needed to be. And I said so. And they said, oh, there is no such thing. And I said, I think there is. And I reached out to somebody in New York I found who became my amazing business partner, Ellen Rader. And we worked together for years and years. It formed a company together. And we did a pilot for the UN, which they loved. And then one day I was sitting in my office in New York City, and this fax came through on the fax machine. No one called me, just a fax came through. And I looked at it, and it was this huge contract with the UN to deliver all this collaborative negotiation, mediation program around the world. So that's sort of how it began. And then Really, in retrospect, it was one of the largest peace, if you could call it a peace building initiative that happened in the last 15 or so years. We really rolled it out all over the place, maybe 20 years at this point. We rolled it out all over the globe to all the UN offices and, engaged with a lot of people. I think launched a lot of it inspired a lot of people. So it was a real privilege to be able to do it.
You've done so much. And like I said, lawyer, podcaster, just an incredible individual who has truly made a change. But I've been able to, listen to a lot of TED Talks. And one of my favorite is by Lavi Ajayi, who talks about, be the domino, be that change in either someone else's life, your community. You've clearly had a lot of dominoes in your life, but it's truly, truly incredible to see how, this idea that you had just grow and just make the impact that it has. So thank you for really answering that question. At PMI, you and I have had some conversations, but we're all about empowering individuals just like you are to be change makers. The world of work truly is undergoing dramatic changes that haven't had an impact on women, men, organizations, societies, everything, quite frankly. A few years ago, we looked at the future of work through the lens of, the post-COVID era. What does that look like? Possibly a hybrid world, possibly, the possibilities were quite frankly endless because it was almost like we were starting with a blank slate. Well, we're living that world right now. As our world and lives continue to evolve over time, taking into consideration the known and unknown impacts coming our way, changemakers are poised to really shape what it looks like. And for the purposes of this conversation specifically, we're looking at how changemakers can truly change and shape the future of work. So as we really start this conversation, I'm going to ask, that early question of how really can we define future of work?
Well, it's hard to define it without thinking about the future itself. And to me, I guess when I think about the future, I'm a big systems theorist, and one of the things that comes to mind is the future of our planet and what's happening with it. And I think in terms of circles, and the biggest sphere I can think of course, there's the universe, is our globe, that our mother, if you want, and obviously we are in a moment in time. I know the world has always gone through difficult times, but this one feels a little tricky, so I think in terms of the future of work, I think everything needs to start with awareness of the largest system that we're operating in, which is this planetary system. I think narrative is so interesting in terms of how we think about ourselves as humans on this planet, and how it shapes our thinking. I was listened to this astrophysicist, Brian Swim, who talked, everybody's heard about the Big Bang. I don't know if that's the way it's taught in in all countries of the world, but I think it's pretty global. I don't know. But he was saying how masculine this phrase was, and actually how inaccurate in his mind it was, that the beginnings of our universe was much more like something he called a very feminine idea, the great effulgence. And I'm just going to use his language, that one of the first principles of our beginnings was differentiation, that everything was differentiated. Nothing was the same. It wasn't a pile of gas that evolved. It was differentiated beings, differentiated things. Differentiation is the main principle in us, not monoculture. So I think that's something to start with, in terms, I know this audience is very interested in inclusion, which I really applaud you, because I think it's the essence of our ultimate survival and creativity. I will say too that I am a pretty deep naturalist, and I've been clearing invasive species a lot recently. And I notice what's so interesting, and it's metaphoric to what we're talking about, is when you get rid of the invasives, all these native species start popping up, and they are diverse and beautiful and wild. And it's really quite moving. So anyway, the future of work, I guess I like management consultant Pete Drucker says the best way to predict the future is to create it. I create my future every day. I pay attention to my values, and I think each one of us is creating that new future, and it's unclear how that's going to go. But that's part of what makes it interesting and exciting.
Yeah, I can agree with you more. And just digging deeper a little bit onto one of the points that you made, whereas, everyone is coming together to create this new future of work. We're bringing our own past experiences and what makes us us. It almost reminds me of, just from the diversity, equity, inclusion perspective at PMI, one of the things we're focusing on this year is driving inclusion through intersectionality. And that's really honing into who you are as a person, bringing it to the table and taking everything that makes everyone unique and making our culture better. So I truly see a lot of alignment there. Thank you for defining that for me. So kind of playing into that, collaboration and everyone coming together really leads us into my next question for you, which I'm going to say quite astutely or straightforward. How does collaboration play a part into the future of work? I know you touched on it a little bit towards the end of your response to the previous question, but I'd love for you to dig a little bit deeper.
I think humanity is in a bit of a conundrum, really. I'm a student of negotiation, and the two basic strategies in negotiation are collaboration and competition. And we always have a choice about which way we're going to go. Now, I think that's, I'm going to, I guess, talk about competition as more like an adversarial strategy versus being a competitive person. Like, competition is a good thing in business. It helps create a level playing field for everybody. It helps avoid monocultures. That's the reason that the Standard Oil Company had to get broken up long ago in the United States. But on project management teams, there's always a choice about whether differences are going to be worked out in a collaborative way or a competitive way. And it has a lot to do with the climate that gets set. So I don't know. As I said, my specialty is negotiation. And probably many people here, hopefully many people, have heard one of these classic stories that was put in the book Getting to Yes long ago. It actually came from a woman, Mary Parker Follett, who had been practicing in the Western world, that is. The Harvard authors picked that up and turned it into an orange story, which is that, say you're a parent, your two kids are fighting over one orange. How do you resolve it? Well, a lot of people say, oh, you just cut it in half. And probably the first thing that comes to mind, right? You cut the damn thing in half. A lot of exhausted parents say, you take the damn orange away. But the thing that is happening in this little anecdote is that we're all making an assumption about what the kids want the orange for. We're assuming that the kids want to eat the orange. And in fact, one of the kids wants to eat the orange. That's true. The other kid actually wants the skin because they're making some marmalade. And so when you actually ask the question about underlying needs and interests, you find out that one wants the skin and one wants the meat. And you can give each 100% of what they want, not 50% if you cut it in half, and not 0% if you take it away. But it requires communication and it requires collaboration. And a lot of times people don't, I've just been working with a client that, oh my God, sometimes it's so difficult for people to talk about what's really going on, to talk about what they really care about, to talk about what their underlying interests and needs are. But you can't create very well, you can't create value if you don't know what people's underlying interests are. And one of the things that's really clear is that a lot of people, when you polarize at the positional level, for instance, you get kind of stupid. You get into a power struggle. and you leave a lot of value on the table. So um, collaboration, the heart of it is about really understanding what our different needs and interests are and maximizing need satisfaction, because we don't all have the same, we do have all the same needs, but they show up differently for different people at different times. And when you know what they are, you're able to fulfill them much better.
Thank you, Susan. So I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit and, excuse me, expand on kind of this collaboration and negotiation topic. So, how can a manager set the example for inclusive collaboration as we enter the future of work? A lot of times within organizations, we talk about how change has to come from the top down. A lot of times you know, and I'm sure with your experience and everyone's experience here, we see that there's a message coming from the top, but as it kind of trickles down, it starts to get muddied, it starts to get lost, and by the time it gets to those who are further removed from those in senior leadership, I'll say, the consistency just quite frankly isn't there. So one of the things that I've seen, especially from within change management and when it comes specifically to strengthening communication and just anything across an organization, is reinforcing those types of things at the manager level. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, the manager, the leadership is really everything. And leadership and management are not exactly the same thing, but they're very closely aligned. And so often, I do a lot of, I'll call it organizational mediation, organizational interventions. I've done a lot of them in different parts of the world. And a lot of the time, honestly, it's because the leader, the manager, um, needs to mature some as a human, not just managerial skills, it's human skills too. And the way I end up working with them often is, like any coach, mediator, whatever you want to call me, I use different titles, but it's often like really supporting that leader to grow up a bit and to so I have to challenge them. I need to support them. But leadership is, there was one time in my training, I've had a lot of Gestalt training, and one time I said to my main teacher, I said, gosh, sometimes these organizational issues, they really look an awful lot like mommy and daddy issues. And he said, yeah, they do. You just can't talk about them like that. But I'm a parent, and I feel like myself, in terms of how I've shown up as a parent, has required a lot of maturity on my part, because if I don't do the work myself, it trickles into my kids. I think the same thing happens with managers. If you don't do the work yourself, it trickles into your team. And I am a big believer in creating collaborative work teams. I believe that they're the heart of creativity. I believe that creativity is what we need urgently right now on the planet. And that only will happen if the manager is really a grown up, a real grown up, and able to set good boundaries, but be fair, inspirational, facilitate diversity, facilitate diverse perspectives. I just did this one. I've been working with this one group, and really, what needed to happen was a lot of conflict on this team. And I asked the manager in charge, I said, did you bring everybody together to talk about oh, no. We didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. It's like something that's, of course, as a facilitator and whatever my phraseology is, facilitator, mediator, coach, whatever, I'm doing all the time. You get the system into the room. And then the comment is always, no one will talk. They always talk. People always talk when you give them the right environment to talk. So I don't know if I'm maybe digressing from your question, but I think leadership, managerial leadership is absolutely key. We need a lot more of it. That's really excellent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And a lot of times when you do those like risk assessment studies for an organization, or even with organizations who do a lot of, well, I hope not a lot, but who conduct exit interviews. Individuals oftentimes say that the number one reason for either leaving or the number one risk to an organization is a bad manager. That's just a fact. And so I think if we can integrate more practices like this within our culture, within our leadership and management trainings, we can truly rectify those issues moving forward. So I appreciate your insights for that question.
Yeah, because managerial skills, sometimes, so often people, get put into the leadership or the managerial leader role because of their substantive skills, not necessarily because of their relational skills. And really, good management requires an awful lot of the soft skills, what I would call um, more of the feminine. And I just want to say something about that. In general, when I say the feminine, I'm not talking about your gender at birth or anything. I'm talking about a set of principles of qualities that are feminine or masculine that can show up in really any human.
I couldn't agree more. And I actually want to give a little tidbit that I recently learned, and specifically inclusive leadership training that I took within our organization. And to be an inclusive leader, and this, I will not take any type of credit for this because it came from someone within my small breakout group who said this. But to be an inclusive leader, you have to be a triple threat. You need to be a coach, a mentor, and an ally. You can't just be one, you can't just be two, but you have to be all three. So, you know how a lot of times they'll say, oh, an entertainer is a triple threat, meaning they can act, they can sing, they can dance. Well, if you're an inclusive leader, you need to be a triple threat. You can be a coach, a mentor, and an ally. Quite frankly, for me, that's what I see as being an example of having those inclusive collaborations as well. So, you can create these environments that you outlined earlier, but if you're not living up to what your environment is, your environment will not last for very long because the people within it will see that, oh, well, this is a lot of talk. There's nothing there from my manager or my leaders to back it up. So, again, thank you for your thoughts on that particular question.
Yeah, people really pay attention to what you do, not what you say. You need to walk your talk, and people smell a rat very, very quickly if there isn't alignment, the kind of alignment that you're talking about.
Thank you. So my next question for you, Susan, is, something that has really plagued the history of work culture, and you kind of touched on it a little bit already, is the defined gender roles and stereotypes for behavior. What really is the connection between gender collaboration and the future of work? We've kind of danced around it a little bit here and there, but I'd like to kind of get to the point of that one now.
Big topic. Obviously, in the last 50 years or so, I don't know what it is, women have been entering, and that's probably the biggest change in our workforce, is women entering the workforce. And our workforce is getting more diverse in general. That has, I'll talk about the women specifically, because that's brought with it some requests, needs for some really important things for everyone, like transparency, work-life balance, fairness in pay and perks, a respectful workplace environment. I mean, I could go on. But these things are really great for all humans. They're not always seen that way, but they really are. They make the workforce a better place. Let's face it, our workplaces were really designed for 20th century white men, not necessarily 21st century human beings. That's changing, and that's really exciting. It's an evolution. So women, people of color, in some ways we sort of are imposters into that system, but a very, I think, positive one for many men feel like such a welcome change because they benefit as well. Of course, there are some that see it as a win-lose proposition. Some women as well see it as a win-lose proposition. It's not. I think it's really a win-win for everybody, and it's the wave of the future. I also think that organizations are so well situated to be the kind of leadership we need. Family systems, organizational systems are kind of the building blocks of those systems that I'm talking about, the planetary system being the big one. But in some ways, organizational systems have more ease in bringing in, influences from the outside, doing training, cutting through stuff that's not working. Where family systems, it can be a little more tricky, a little more off the radar. So anyway, I think you get a much better work product.
How can individuals, whether they identify as women or not, as a woman, excuse me, or not, but how can we use those feminine touches? Because quite frankly, whether you identify as a woman or not, everyone has masculine and feminine within them. But how do we negotiate and resolve conflict within our workplaces, within our teams, within our project teams, or anywhere for that matter? I really liked what you had said earlier about how we're kind of changing the narrative on things. I can give you an example of how I changed the narrative about stereotypes about myself. When I was younger, I oftentimes was told I was bossy, I was loud, I was this, I was that. I have informed individuals now who start to fix their mouths to say that to me that no, actually, yes, I can be bossy at times.
Good girl.
But what I also am is a phenomenal leader. I'm a phenomenal listener, and I really take time to be empathetic towards people to really understand and learn them, which are really great traits. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect with that every single time, but I'm learning when to tap into those skill sets when it comes to negotiating and resolving conflict. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what does it mean to bring the feminine, if you will, into how we negotiate and resolve conflict? I think you kind of have to start with first, what is negotiation? And it's interesting to ask, I'll just ask you if you're listening, what comes to mind when you think of the word negotiation? Who comes to mind when you think of the word negotiation? I define negotiation pretty broadly. I think a lot of times the stereotype is kind of like a salary negotiation, or or men sitting around a table with blue business suits on, and they're usually white men and blah 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 and whatever. I would define negotiation as simply any time a person or party is trying to directly influence or persuade another person or a party. So by that definition, it's happening a lot. And I think the reason I think it's useful to think about the definition is because then when you think about the skill set of negotiation, you begin to apply it to a lot of different circumstances. So, you're negotiating around your kids, you're negotiating on project management teams, you're negotiating with your intimate partner, there's negotiations around war and peace. And a lot of the same skill set is applying in all of these different circumstances. And that's, and people's ability to handle them it grows in each of these different circumstances. But there are basically two different kinds of negotiation. There's what I call conflict negotiation and exchange negotiation. The exchange negotiation, I'll give you this if you give me that, And then there's the conflict one, which is much more difficult. It's like you want this and I want that, and we're in opposition to each other. You can feel the tension right away. It's like, how do you deal with that? Much harder for humans. And of course, lots of times the exchange and the conflict ones are combined, but the conflict ones in general are harder for humans to deal with because we are a little freaked out by conflict. We have a lot of destructive conflict going on all over the planet, and a lot of bad modeling for how it's handled, but also a lot of good modeling. But we tend to look at the bad modeling because if it bleeds, it leads, and the media is like, whatever. So one of the reasons it's difficult is because there's a basic tension in negotiation between the substance of the negotiation and the relationship in the negotiation. You want good substance and you want a good relationship in every negotiation. But that's difficult to achieve. So, let me ask you, when you think, let's just play a game for a second and think about and if you're listening, just think about if you were defining the characteristics of a purely substantive negotiator, someone who's just interested in substance, what are the words that would come to mind to describe that person? And what would be the gender? And I know I'm pulling into stereotypes, but, I've asked this question. The kinds of responses are, like tough, focused, blunt, brutal, self-focused, strong, or typical. Again, I'm being general here, but, I think probably people know what I'm talking about. If you are focused on substance all the time and never on the relationship, you may get what you want, but in the short term, and the relationship is going to suffer. But if you're all focused on relationship and not on the substance, that's not going to get you a good negotiation. So ideally, you are doing both, but there's a lot of tension. Having gone through that, is there a gender component to what I just did? And I would say there is. I would say on the planet, looking at the planet writ large, there's a huge, and again, I'm going into stereotypes, but, traditionally, men have been focused on substance, women have been focused on relationship. And there are plenty of men that don't do that, and there are plenty of women that do the opposite, and all of that is true. But over the last 50 years, I think women have been doing a lot to skill themselves up so that they're really good at the substance. And men are behind improving themselves on the relational stuff. But bringing the feminine to, and now I'm using just the quality of the feminine, it's really about the relational aspect of humanity. And it's one of the reasons why I think sometimes the soft skills are the hard skills. But I like the image of the fierce mother lion. There's no kumbaya in her, man. No kumbaya. She is fierce. You mess with her cubs, she's going to kill you. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody get killed here, but I think a feminine, a negotiator that's bringing a lot of the relational qualities can be very fierce, firm, fair, principled. And it's some of what I'm trying to support women to do in their leadership around the world.
I absolutely love that. Lions are one of my favorite animals.
You're right.
Now you just got me more excited to hopefully see one at some point in my life. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Not too close, though. Not too close.
Oh, no, not close. Taking kind of those skills that you just shared we talked about at the leadership, senior leadership, managerial level, how those individuals can make a change. But for the individual contributor and change makers, there are things that those individuals can do to contribute to a collaborative workplace. How does negotiation play a part in that? And specifically, how does intercultural negotiation play a part?
Because I deal with a lot of conflict. People like to get into blaming other people. But what blame is defined as externalizing pain and discomfort. It's difficult to accept that none of us really have the capacity to change any other human being. Bottom line, as frustrating as that might be, that is the truth. And that's not to say that some people aren't true victims. I'm not suggesting that's not the case. But nonetheless, even if you are a true victim, it's really the only person you really have control over is yourself. And so each individual contributor, I think all of us need to be asking ourselves those fundamental questions. Who am I? What do I want? How am I going to get it? And how am I going to be contributing? I'm a small part of this very large thing that's happening on this planet. But I understand at the planetary level, we have a choice about, are we doing this together? Are we doing it individually? And how am I going to play a part in how this all unfolds? Because I really believe that what each of us does absolutely is affecting everybody else. I mean, again, I'll come back to myself as a mother. I sometimes, and I have grown children, but I sometimes am a little bit blown away by how my choice of language can influence my very smart kids and how they roll. And I think that's true of managers. I think that's true of everyone in terms of what we're choosing, how we're showing up, what we're saying in the world, and how we are staying small or how we're choosing to go larger. And I will, say also for women first and foremost, I think that one of the things, because a lot of my a lot of my focus these days is women in negotiation. Working on hard on a book about that. Please look for that. But I think one of the things, again, a little bit falling into stereotypes, but not, it's real, is that patriarchy has been a bit of a hex on, I think, women. Patriarchy's only been around for, 6,000, 7,000 years. Before that, men and women lived in very much collaboration with each other, cooperation with each other. And somehow over time, during the lifetime of patriarchy, we as women have lost a lot of our power. And that's why there's a lot of conversation about power for women. And I think fundamentally, it's important for each of us as women to totally get it that we are not secondary in any way. We are totally divine. We are absolutely capable, but we need to each get that in our own cell structures, if we will. We need to really own it. And that's not always easy to do that.
It really, really isn't. But I do think that something that everyone can do to help make it a little bit easier is, being intentional with being inclusive, and taking those steps to learn about yourself, understanding who you are so that you can, be that ally to either to anyone around you, quite frankly. So when it comes to negotiation and collaboration and mediation and being in the workplace, really, what does inclusion have anything to do with any of that?
At the bottom line, if you have an adversarial climate, it's really, you tend to see people polarize around identity group. And I hope everyone heard what I just said, because it's predictable and it has powerful implications. The dominant cultural group will prevail if what you have is a very highly competitive adversarial climate. So if you're creating a more collaborative work environment, you're going to allow differences are there. They're wonderful, but they don't become the source of the conflict, if you will. They just become a source of richness. Not always, but in general. So diversity is profoundly linked to gender equality. And I'm going to go whip back again to pre-patriarchal times, the beginning of this one up, one down kind of thinking. It started with the domination of men over women, men being used to be warriors. Patriarchy to me is not an anti-male term. I just want to say that. But it is a worldview. It is a worldview of domination versus partnership. And I think it's a worldview that has kind of, it's gone beyond its value to all of us as humans. Because the more we release ourselves from it, domination, predation, rapaciousness, whatever, we have a lot of the master of the universe stuff going on, particularly in my country. We have this myth of the individual, it's sometimes just like excessive capitalism, which I think is not helping us. I'm all for entrepreneurial behavior and innovation and all that, but I think sometimes we've gone, it's too exploitive for a lot of groups. So anyway, I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but basically, I think when you create more communities and climates of collaboration, you allow much more diversity and much less monoculture behavior.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to tie that in even more with, we're here for Project Management Institute. How does that even relate to project management? Well, as everyone here knows, when you have diversity within your team, you end up leading to more creative ideas. Those creative ideas lead to innovation. And what does innovation lead to? Project excellence. That's what we're all striving for. So That I think right there really connects the dots with all of this. How as individuals we can use these skills that we have that balance both the masculine and the feminine to really work to negotiate and resolve conflict as we continue to work towards our goals. And even, during our times of when the project has been completed, looking back, okay, well, this is what went well. This is what could have gone better. These are areas that maybe we want to dive deeper into a little bit more for the next time so that we can achieve that project, whether it's, on time, on budget, hopefully that's how we always want to get it, but bring it across the finish line, I should say, rather. However, but again, we're all striving to get to this one place. But in order to do that, we have to think of each individual as well. So as we come really to a close, Susan, any last kind of parting words of wisdom for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, we have something in the conflict resolution world, which is, crisis is crisis and opportunity, and there's these Chinese characters, which people have probably seen at some point, which means danger and opportunity. Crisis is both danger and opportunity, and we have analogized it to what conflict is like. It's both dangerous and there's opportunity. Well, I think we are. I mean, not to be, hey, I'm not making it up, but I think everybody knows we are in a bit of a. It feels like we're in a bit of a crisis around the climate, and it pervades everything, every project management team, everything we're doing. I think we need to pay attention. And there's this African adage. I'm sure people have heard it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think we need to go fast and far. And I think we need to go together. And we also need to be supporting the individual in the unique ideas that individual comes up with. But some of what I'm considering kind of like a worldview that is beyond its sell date, what I'm calling a patriarchal worldview, the one up, one down, predatory dominion kind of thing, I think it's time to get rid of it. I also think that how each of us resolves conflict, negotiates, adds up to that, because the more we understand how to negotiate in a way that's firm, fair, principled, and brings in a much more relational quality, I think people feel better. They have more fun. We need to have more fun on this planet at the moment. Everything's a little intense. Another thing I just want to say is to not be afraid of gender equality, and gender fluidity. I think it's really brings a lot of richness to all of us, and allows all of us to be more whole humans, which is what I think everybody wants to be, is the experience of being a whole human, not cut into half, like you can be this and you can be that. No, you can be a whole human and bring all of your gifts and allow other people to flourish as well.
Well, Susan, it was truly an honor to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your contribution to supporting people as we really work towards a more collaborative and peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciated it.
If you're interested in hearing more on Susan's expertise, be sure to follow her on her website. For more information on DEI at PMI, head to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion site on pmi.org. Thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and have a new outlook and understanding on the future of work and how we can all utilize it in our best interests.